Welcome to the All Kids Can podcast, dedicated to supporting parents on their journey to nurture happy, successful children in every facet of life, particularly their journey through their education. Whether you're navigating the complexities of a recent diagnosis or you're finding that your child is struggling to have success with their learning, this podcast is for you. As a parent, you have incredible power and influence in your child's life. And with the right knowledge and strategies, you will be empowered to guide your child towards their best life. I'm your host, Christy Howarth, accredited dyslexia therapist, special education teacher, family coach, and mum of two brilliantly neurospicy kids of my own. Are you ready? Let's dive in. Welcome to another episode of the All Kids Can podcast. Today, I am thrilled to have Chrissie Davies here with us. Chrissie is a child behavioural specialist, trauma-informed educator, consultant, author, guest speaker, loving mama of two adopted children, and fierce advocate for understanding differently wired children. She is committed to empowering and supporting families to live their life with radical playfulness, love, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy, and a bucket load of fun along the way. Welcome to the podcast, Chrissie.
Thank you for having me.
Such a pleasure. Chrissie, firstly, let's get started by understanding your story and the journey that has led you into the world of special education and supporting parents with differently wired children.
Oh, where do we start? Well, I'll start very briefly at the beginning because I think it's important. So I had a very long and successful career in education. I was a teacher for 15 years, predominantly working in specialist settings. But when I did my formal education, I did a diploma of special ed and human services when I was at uni. And back in the day, we're going back quite a while now, but one of my placements was in a special development school for children who had significant physical and intellectual disabilities. And after doing that, kind of spending some time in that space, I kind of decided that it wasn't for me. Anyway, fast track, I moved over to the UK. And when I was living over there, having a certificate in special education was really highly valued. And my teaching agency that I was engaged with over there kept sending me to wanting to send me to specialist settings. And I kept saying no, right? And then eventually one day they wore me down and they said, we've got this placement at a school for children who have social and emotional behavioural challenges. It's a 3-day placement. Can you just go for one day? And if you don't enjoy it, we'll cancel the booking. 4 years later, I was still there and I had found my calling in special education, predominantly working with children. Back then was more significantly like trauma backgrounds, children who came from significant adverse childhood experiences. But now we know the impacts around the neurodivergent, neurotype and brain functioning. And it's just my calling. They're my people. And it all makes sense to me now why I had such a gift with these kids.
Yeah, that's awesome, Chrissie. I love that you just you had no choice. Like the universe just needed you to get in there, and despite your sort of hesitancy at the start, it was really where your love was really going to blossom for helping kids. So, if parents, I know that you do specialise and you have a wealth of knowledge around ADHD. If parents that are listening are suspecting ADHD for their child, what kind of things would they be noticing at home and in the classroom? And are those things the same?
Absolutely not, because they're different, probably different environments. And I would probably say to parents, also having lived through that with my two beautiful ADHDers myself, that we talk about children having tantrums, which are all developmentally appropriate and, within that normal child development. We don't like that word normal. I mean, what is normal? But you know what I mean, for intensive purposes. I would say one of the very, very first key indicators in the neurodivergent community and the ADHD community is around the intensity of big behaviors, big emotions, I should say. So the meltdowns, which can often lead to destructive behavior or aggression or, those physical, really big behaviors. And it's more the intensity and the duration. All kids have tantrums and experience emotional dysregulation, but in the ADHD community, it is so much more than that. And one of the biggest barriers that we have is that people keep saying, well, all kids have tantrums, but it is not the same. And it is the length and the duration and the intensity and the way that it causes so much distress on the child that I would say is one of the first big indicators.
Is that difficult for parents that have nothing to compare it to?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
If it's your first child and you're new to the world of, raising differently wired children, which it might be a good point to drop in here, that we do know that ADHD is genetic, in that it is a neurotype that is shared amongst families. And often this can be a really confusing time for parents, especially parents who it's their first kiddo and they're like, well, I don't know, is this normal? Everyone keeps telling me it's normal. And one of the things that we notice in our community is the way that these concerns are often minimized or dismissed. Because you're a first-time parent too, you're not sure. Do you know what I mean? And people keep telling you, oh, it's just boys, or that's normal, or all kids are distracted, or all kids have tantrums, but it's not the same. And so it's really important that we connect with people, I suppose, who have that lived experience and understanding that that early diagnosis stage is incredibly overwhelming and difficult for families.
So if they have nothing to compare it with and everyone around them is kind of going, oh, it's normal, don't worry, that's just kids. Often, I guess, parents get a gut feeling that something is going on. But are there any other indicators that you can kind of link to that same neurotype?
I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because mother intuition, or a mother's gut, in my experience of 26 years of working with predominantly mums, is they just know. There is something inside of them saying, this is not adding up, or this is not making sense, or whatever it might be, right? And so really try to trust your own intuition around some of those messages that you might be receiving about your child as well. And I guess obviously some of the really common ones are inability to sustain focus. I mean, this is what also can be a misconception, especially because girls present very differently to boys with the ADHD neurotype. And so once again, we can't put a blanket across everything. But if I think about my own experience, one of the other things that was really big for both of my kids was around sensory challenges. So any kind of sensory clothing or sounds or smells or all those sorts of things were also other really big indicators. And then if we're linking into where you're at, I suppose, in terms of working with kids maybe that have started school, a lot of it for me, especially for my daughter, was around working memory. It was like, I've taught so many kids to read, this ain't sticking. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
and so there were lots of those little indicators for me, especially having that knowledge. But for parents who don't have that knowledge, they might not necessarily know that that's what's going on either.
Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense, Chrissie. And we have mentioned the term neurotype previously in this conversation. So there might be parents that aren't sure what that actually means. And can you explain what a neurotype is and delve into that a little bit more to allow parents to have a better understanding of how brains actually work within the human?
Oh, I love talking about the brain. It's my biggest passion, as you would know from the books that I've written and the work that I do as well. But I think the easiest way to explain it is that your neurotype, or your brain functioning, is as individualized as your fingerprints. That every single person is unique, which means that they think, feel, see, move through the world and process information in their own unique way. Now, we know that this can also be enhanced or minimized depending on your environmental background, the way you're parented, the experiences that your family provides for you, if we're talking about kids. And we then bring all of those different things into our perceptions about the world, about how relationships work and all those sorts of things, right? Our social emotional intelligence, the way that our parents read to us or whatever it might be, right? All of those things then work together to create the neural pathways in our brain. And so when we're talking about the neurodivergent community, all that means is that our brains, if we're thinking about ADHD, diverge from the most common type of brain, which we call the neurotypical brain, which, as we know, as so many more people are being identified, I think that the neurotypical brain is going to certainly be up there, being challenged by the neurodivergent brains as we are celebrating and uncovering all of these incredible neurotypes. Yes. And I think that that's such a big part of the work that you're doing as well, is that, when we have identified that a child is an ADHD or is autistic or dyslexic, then it's really about us understanding how their brain operates, how they think, how they learn, how they see the world, and then adjusting our expectations and our approaches around how we're doing things that are more in alignment with their brain functioning.
Yep. And I would imagine also tailoring their environment to suit their brain as well, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, environment is huge. When we're talking about ADHD, as we say that the two most influential relationships on the success of the trajectory of a neurodivergent child is the parenting skills and then the teacher skills, or the teacher's understanding and embracing of that uniqueness, right? Rather than expecting these kids or these neurodivergent brains to be neurotypical when they actually cannot physically, cognitively, spiritually, and mentally and emotionally do it. And this is what happens when we try to push kids into a mold or a way of functioning and thinking that is so against their natural alignment in fundamentally who they are meant to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Amen to that. And the more awareness that we can create around neurotypes, the more that we can serve these little humans in helping them thrive within the world with the beautiful brain, with the huge amount of potential and capacity that it has to change the world. It is not a small thing. This is big, on an evolutionary page. It's massive. And if we can allow these kids to really thrive in their worlds, it's good for everyone. It really is, not only for the child.
Yeah, and what you would see, and what I definitely see through my work, because obviously I work with lots of families who are experiencing behaviours that they're trying to navigate and be a bit more curious about. And it's actually when you can actually step back and say, okay, if I can learn to embrace my child for who they actually are, rather than not who the world or society or the education system expects them to be, all of a sudden you start to see a very different kid. And all of a sudden that child feels freer to be their true authentic selves, which means we then reduce the stress, the confusion, and we allow them to, show us every single day who they actually are. And that person is actually really incredibly beautiful.
Yes.
It's when we try to go against that we get all of this resistance and pushback and negativity and what looks like oppositional behaviour from our kids.
Yeah. It's so hopeful, isn't it? For parents that are struggling, there is a way to really, tailor that child's experience in life and have a more harmonious chaos to come, right? That's your motto.
Yeah, trust me, people who are listening, we still have some chaotic days around the child charmers family as well. I'm living it with you people. And I think that's one of the other things about the ADHD neurotype specifically is the fluctuation. It's like one day you're up, the next day you're down. Do you know what I mean? And that can be quite tiring and exhausting for families. So we've got to learn to lean in, on the hard days and really celebrate the days when our kids are thriving and, just living their best life.
Agree. Chrissie, I would love to hear some of your tips on advocating for children at school, because parents find this confronting and very difficult to do so with. So what kind of strategies can we give parents so that they can feel more empowered and more confident to advocate for their child within a school setting?
Okay, so can we first just put on the table too that sometimes it is a teacher or an educator who may flag that your child is neurodivergent. And for some parents, that's going to be quite confronting and maybe a bit of a shock or a surprise, or maybe not. Because once neurodivergent kids particularly, hit formal learning, in my experience, is when we start to encounter quite a few challenges, right? Because once again, don't fit the mold or the expectation or the one size fits all model. Like, we're getting better, but you and I could talk about this all day. But one of the things to remember about advocacy, and I still have to advocate for both of my children as well, is everything comes back to the way you communicate. If we constantly always come from a place of understanding that we all want the best for the child, it's not about us, it's not about the teacher. It's when advocacy has to have the child at the forefront of every single conversation that we're having in regard to how do we support their needs for them to be able to learn in a way that works best for them, right? Now, many teachers know, and I'm sure there's teachers who are going to be listening to this podcast, that is what is most incredibly difficult about being a modern day educator in a classroom, which I think we say the stats are now like, in every classroom there's going to be 3 to 5 neurodivergent kids, right? One of the joys, but one of the challenges. And so the most important thing is about teamwork, collaboration, coming together, a shared respect for the important role that we both play in the life of this child, right? Teachers are human beings, parents are human beings, and in between we have this gorgeous little human who is relying on us to lead the way in sort of helping them understand how to learn, I suppose, because let's face it, that's why they're at school. So first and foremost, that relationship is so important, and I really encourage parents to value that. And the way that we talk about educators at home is incredibly important too, even when we're frustrated, that we try not to have those conversations in front of children, because it is often the adults making a lot of those decisions for the kids. But I think also a really big piece in advocacy work that I'm doing in schools is that the student voice is often missing. How do we ask our kids, what is difficult about school for you or learning for you? Or what are the things that you think your teacher could do to support you and help you with your learning? You know what I mean? Is that as a way of also tapping into, okay, well, the teacher could do this or X, Y, and Z or whatever it is, right?
Yep.
Because we have all these meetings. There's a saying that we use in our community: nothing about us without us. And it's about tapping into, one, first and foremost, trying to teach the child about their own neurodivergence and where their support needs are, and how they can utilize some of the supports and accommodations that we can provide for them, but they have to be willing to use them, like noise cancelling headphones, for example.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So that's really important, that we get the buy-in from the child as well, rather than just making all these decisions.
Agree.
And I think in my experience, one of the big what happens with, because often I'm brought in at the point where schools and families are at loggerheads and they're not moving forward, and sometimes bringing in that external voice, like an external advocate, allows you to stay in the parenting role And even when we go into all the meetings, because my husband comes with me as well for our kids, he often says things to me like, sometimes I just get so lost in the conversation, and teachers have this very unique language that they use, and lots of, acronyms and like IEPs and behaviour support plans and all that sort of stuff. And if you don't have a background in education, then that's really bamboozling. And often parents say that to me. I walk out of the meeting sitting there thinking to myself, oh, like, I kind of get it, but I don't really get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think that it's okay. I really want to highlight that message, that it's actually really okay to say that you don't get it all.
Yeah.
The one thing you do know as a parent, though, is that you know your child best. You know you've raised this kid since they were a baby. You know everything about them, but you don't know everything about them in an educational setting. And so it's really important that we listen to educators, and what they're telling us or what they're seeing in the classroom is also going to be very different to maybe what we experience outside of an educational environment.
Mm-hmm. So really, it's a lot about coming at it from a collaborative point of view and really keeping the light shining on the child. Nothing to do with anything else. But when we create that really laser focus, I guess all of the defensiveness and all of that kind of ego stuff can really start to naturally drop away, you would hope, when we're really focusing on the well-being of the child. And then I love that you get the child involved, because they do have to buy in. I love that, Chrissie. Thank you.
And I think also coming from that strengths-based philosophy, that what is the child doing really well? What are their strengths? What are their interests? Because, these kids are amazing and they have so much to share and so much to offer. But the way that we're presenting information or the activity maybe doesn't light them up, because, hello, ADHD, we're wired for interest. If it's boring, it means nothing to us. Do you know what I mean? And I can say that from a personal experience myself as an ADHDer, and once again, as educators, not every activity that we plan is going to light up, that child's brain. But how could we present it or use their interests or their strengths as a way of engaging them in a more positive way?
Yeah, great. I love that. And really, I suppose that kind of thing could go in the IEP, the individual education plan, or, having their interests known, and so that we can spark the kids with their learning would be part of what we would talk about at meetings, right? Not just their deficits.
Absolutely. When I'm working with my clients in educational advocacy, I have a beautiful personal profile that I get families to fill out. And it is the voice of the child. You've seen it, yeah. And it's amazing. And so many teachers say to me, wow, this is such a beautiful document. Like, just so positive, and always looking at the strengths and the things that these kids can do. And it's shared collectively amongst the staff for all, like the specialists who are working with the kids, or families can use them when their kids go off to gymnastics or a holiday program or whatever it is, because the more information we can share with the grown-ups who are working with our kids, the more likely they're going to know how to understand them in the same way that we do.
Yes, and see everything about them, not just that negative behavior that might be standing out, excuse me, like a sore thumb. I love that. That's great. So, Chrissie, you've touched a little bit on how you do support families with their children through coming in and helping them within meetings within the schools. What else do you do to help parents with their kids that might be differently wired, and helping them? Because I know, and I do have copies of your amazing books. Tell us a little bit about your books and how you came to write them, and the two different focuses of each of those books, because I love it how you hit it from two different angles.
Well, and you'll love this story too. So being an ADHDer, one of the, we won't generalise, but, categorically we're known for we don't like being told what to do. And everybody, so I've been in my consulting business for over a decade now. And as my profile was sort of growing, I was working with a publicist and PR agent, and they were like, you need to write a book. You need to write a parenting book. And I just didn't want to do it. Like, I just didn't, I felt like I'm not a parenting expert. My knowledge and my skill set is education. You know, I was an educator for 15 years, specializing in understanding behavior, do you know what I mean, and communication and social and emotional literacy and intelligence, right? And so that just did not feel aligned with who I wanted to be. But being an educator who had used so many children's books to convey messages to kids, obviously, writing children's books came very naturally to me and actually really excited me. But I think the point of difference with my books is they are still a therapeutic tool for parents. Yes, they are marketed as children's books, but they are written in such a way that they actually empower and educate parents and teachers. Teachers love my books because it's teaching them alongside the child, right?
Yeah.
So my first book, Love Your Brain, is a lot more generalized. And it's really because, to me, one of the missing pieces around children's behavior is we just talk too much to kids, and children don't learn best in that way, right? And if we truly want people to understand how human relationships work and why they do the things they do, first and foremost, we have to teach them about their brain. Right? You know, we have to teach them about brain functioning. We have to teach them that if they don't eat enough, they ain't going to feel good. And if they don't feel good, that means we see that through their behavior, right?
Yeah.
Like, I've had so many people say to me, I was having so many bedtime battles with my child, and then we read your book, and in your book it talks about how brains love sleeping, and how if you love your brain, you should get lots of sleep and eat lots of healthy food and send kind messages to your brain. And so it's really about teaching kids about mental health from a fundamental level of loving yourself for who you are, right? And it's been used in so many different ways for growth mindset, talking about inclusion, talking about neurodivergence, you know what I mean? And then the second book was obviously very much more specific to the ADHD community, because I found through my own lived experience with my own kids, people just don't know. They think they know what ADHD is, or what it looks, feels, sounds like, or how it presents in the neurotype, but I'm here to tell you right now, they just don't know. And that's why this book specifically it's a real mix of fun and vibrancy as a children's story, but it's got facts, ADHD facts, because we know that one of the biggest barriers, or the ways that our families are marginalized or prejudiced against, is other people's misconceptions around the ADHD brain and people in general.
Yeah. And I love it how you just lay it all out there. And again, it's feeding into that collaboratively learning together. And this is how it is. And I love in your Love Your Brain book that you basically externalize the brain and treat it as a treasure that we have to look after, but we never teach kids to do that because it's such an abstract thing, because we can't see it. So being able to really highlight it and help kids understand that this is actually a thing, an organ within your head, and it has so much power, and the way that we harness that power is by treating it right. And what do you call it? Being the brain manager.
Brain manager, yeah. So we're the brain builders, because we are basically, you know, building the neural pathways through the way that we engage with our kids and the experiences we give them. But they are the brain manager of themselves. Do you know what I mean? And so I love that language around that as well, because it's like this shared relationship. It's like, okay, well, I'm the brain builder. I'm going to help you with the building blocks, but you're the one also that has to learn to love and understand your brain, which is why I'm a massive advocate for just owning who you are. You know what I mean? It's it's just who you are. It's who you're meant to be, and there's no shame in that. There's no, I've had so many people come up to me about the book, the ADHD book as well, saying, I don't know how to tell my child that they're an ADHD or they're autistic. And I'm like, well, it's just who they are. Just read the book and hug them tight and say, this is who you're born to be, mate, or do you know what I mean? And yes, there are definitely some challenges around sometimes having that neurotype, like the sensory overload or, the social and emotional friendships or relationship challenges that our kids can encounter. But we can help and support them with those things to be able to grow into an incredible human being, and all of that really starts in the family home, in us embracing them for who they are. And once again, celebrating ourselves, if we are also neurodivergent, because I'm here to tell you it's highly likely, and we just run with it. Take us as we are, baby. Take us or leave us. That's my motto anyway.
Chrissie, it has been such a pleasure to talk with you today. I'm going to drop all of your details in the show notes, but just quickly, how can we find you if we want to learn more about what you do and how you can support parents and what you offer?
Well, you and I met like all good people do these days on Instagram, which we love hanging out on Instagram. It's my favorite platform. I absolutely love it. But I'm everywhere. Like, I'm across all the platforms, but I've got courses and webinars and books and resources and all that sort of stuff. And I think we're going to be cooking up something together too at some point. And I love doing that. I love looking into other people's knowledge and sharing that. And so we can all learn and grow together, so many amazing people working in this space now. And I think it's something that you and I both do really well with our community. It's like we have this knowledge. We don't want to keep it all to ourselves. We want to share it with you so that you can get the best from your kids as well. So obviously there's a website and all that sort of stuff, which I'm sure you'll share, and the books and all that sort of stuff as we go along. But come and hang out.
Woo! Excellent. Thanks again, Chrissie. It's been an absolute pleasure. You've been listening to the All Kids Can podcast. If you like what you've heard on today's episode, I would be grateful if you could take a minute to leave a rating or a review. Thank you for helping us grow and be visible to parents who can benefit from the information in this show. Lastly, if you're not already part of the All Kids Can community, sign up at our website for your free weekly newsletter, links to new podcast episodes, and up-to-date information on our offerings. Head to allkidscan.com.au to sign up and learn more.